tributary to this. Probably commerce had moved there. Tool town, food city, furniture world, carpet village. Well, but there was also, almost indistinguishable, a narrow black line he could take soon instead. He thought at first that it led nowhere, but no, it went on, faltering, seeming at first almost forgotten by the map-maker and the ganglia, but then growing clearer in the northward emptiness, and coming very near a town Smoky knew to be near Edgewood. That one, then. It seemed a walker's road. After measuring with his thumb and finger the distance on the map he had come, and how far he had to go, much farther, he slung on his pack, tilted his hat against the sun, and went on.
A long drink of water.
She was not much in his mind as he walked, though for sure she hadn't been far from it in the last nearly 2 years he had loved her. The room he had met her in was one he looked into with the mind's eye often, sometimes with the trepidation he had felt then, but nowadays with a grateful happiness. Looked in to see George Mouse showing him from afar a glass, a pipe, and his 2 tall cousins, she and her shy sister behind her. It was in the Mouse townhouse, last tenanted house on the block, in the library on the 3rd floor, the one whose mullioned windows were patched with cardboard, and whose dark rug was worn white in pathways between door, bar, and windows. It was that very room. She was tall. She was nearly 6 feet tall, which was several inches taller than Smoky. Her sister, just turned 14, was as tall as he. Their party dresses were short and glittered, hers red, her sister's white. Their long stockings glistened. What was odd was that tall as they were shy, especially the younger, who smiled but wouldn't take Smoky's hand, only turned away farther behind her sister. Delicate giantesses. The older glanced toward George as he made debonair introductions. Her smile was tentative. Her hair was red gold and curly fine. Her name, George said, was Daily Alice. He took her hand, looking up. "A long drink of water," he said, and she began to laugh. Her sister laughed too, and George Mouse bent down and slapped his knee. Smoky, not knowing why the old chestnut should be so funny, looked from one to another with a seraphic idiot's grin, his hand unrelinquished. It was the happiest moment of his life.
Anonymity.
It had not been until he met Daily Alice Drinkwater in the library of the Mouse townhouse, a life particularly charged with happiness, but it happened to be a life suited just right for the courtship he then set out on. He was the only child of his father's second marriage, and was born when his father was nearly 60. When his mother realized that the solid Barnable fortune had largely evanesced under his father's management, and that there had been therefore little reason to marry him and less to bear him a child, she left him in an access of bitterness. That was too bad for Smoky, because of all his relations she was the least anonymous. In fact, she was the only one of any related to him by blood whose face he could instantly bring to memory in his old age, though he had been a boy when she left. Smoky himself mostly inherited the Barnable anonymity, and only a streak of his mother's concreteness. An actual streak, it seemed to those who knew him, a streak of presence surrounded by a dim glow of absence. They were a large family. His father had 5 sons and daughters by his first wife. They all lived in anonymous suburbs of cities in those states whose names begin with an I, and which Smoky's city friends couldn't distinguish from one another. Smoky confused the catalog himself at times. Since his father was supposed by them to have a lot of money, and it was never clear what he intended to do with it, Dad was always welcome in their houses. And after his wife's departure, he chose to sell the house Smoky was born in, and to travel from one to another with his young son, a succession of anonymous dogs, and 7 custom-made chests containing his library. Barnable was an educated man, though his learning was of such a remote and rigid kind that it gave him no conversation and didn't reduce his natural anonymity at all. His older sons and daughters regarded